Well, it's day 98 of our journey through the Bible, and we are still in the book of Job. I want to talk some more about a number of items related to this important book of the Old Testament. Yesterday, we talked about Job's so-called friends. They came to see him, which is good, but for the most part, they brought accusations rather than comfort. Their line of reasoning sort of followed the generally accepted view of their time, and in probably many people's minds, our time. And that is that misfortune, difficult things, suffering can always be traced back to a failure to obey God. That is, it is always a punishment of God for sin. Job argues just as strongly that he's an upright man who has done nothing to deserve this treatment at the hand of God. And then another matter that is extraordinarily important is Job's understanding of Redeemer, or the term Goel. You remember back in the book of Ruth, we talked about that term. You may even want to review those notes. In Job chapter 19, we have one of the highest statements of faith that you'll find in the Old Testament. Job is in the midst of all this suffering and in the middle of being accused by his friends, and in the middle of all the anguish of that, he cries out, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me." Now you realize, again, this is Job who lived before Abraham, and yet he has an awareness that probably he shared with some other men of faith in the living God, that is, in the Yahweh who was there and who would be a future Redeemer. It reinforces our understanding that from Adam onwards, there had been men who understood not only that they needed a Redeemer, but also knew that there was a Redeemer who was going to come. Now, there's another important area of teaching in this book, obviously. It's about suffering itself. Finally, after Job and his friends have debated the question at length and have really failed to arrive at any satisfactory solution, God steps in and doesn't really he doesn't answer their questions at all. But he does speak. He speaks from a whirlwind. And he really won't enter into all the philosophical ideas that are thrown out about the righteous suffers. All he does is reveal himself, particularly as the all-powerful, all-knowing God of creation. And his message to Job is that he doesn't have to explain or justify his actions. He is sovereign. He does what is right, and what he does is often going to be beyond men's understanding. Job is humbled by this outpouring of God's power, and he learns, as we all need to learn, to trust where we cannot understand him. All of this leads Job to say in Job chapter 42, verse 5, "I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you." The book of Job teaches us to trust God in all circumstances. When we suffer, it's usually worthless to try to understand all the reasons for the difficulty. Sometimes the righteous must suffer without knowing any of the reasons why. That's why it's important to learn to trust God in everything. This really amazing book is a way of showing us that God is not captive to his world. He's not captive to his people or our ideas or views about his nature. He is free. He is subject to no will but his own. He's not bound by our understanding or by a lack of it. Job is a book that tells us that God reveals himself and no one could have made it up. Job also discovered that God is a God of great power and majesty. When we see how great he truly is, we realize just how little we are. And like Job, we want to bow down in humble submission. Job's faith eventually triumphed over all adversity. In his case, he was finally restored to more than his former prosperity. Job is a model of spiritual integrity, a person who held fast to his faith without understanding the reason behind his suffering. He serves as a continuing witness to the possibility of authentic faith in God in the most troubling of circumstances. This is a book you'll want to return to many times over your life, particularly in the trials of life as they touch you with their sorrows. We read today from Job chapter 42. Begin with verse 7. After the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, "My anger burns against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." And then we read in verse 10, "And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends. And the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then came to him all his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before, and ate bread with him in his house. And they showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. And each of them gave him a piece of money and a ring of gold. And the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. He had also 7 sons and 3 daughters. Then verse 17, and Job died an old man and full of days.